Hello, I am Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton.
And I am Washtenaw Intermediate School District Superintendent Scott Menzel.
Our police officers are seeing children who have been affected by trauma and toxic stress every day. That's why law enforcement is excited about the Handle with Care initiative. This initiative bridges the communication gap between schools and law enforcement to better support the children who need it most. The Handle with Care initiative is simple. When one of your students is exposed to a traumatic event, that could be anything from a house fire to a shooting to domestic violence, a law enforcement officer will notify the designated individuals at your school in the form of a Handle with Care notice to the child's teacher.
Because Washtenaw ISD is committed to supporting educators across our county, we've developed these series of videos that will help you understand some of the short and long-term signs of trauma that you might observe in a child while at school. The videos will also provide you with some helpful information about how you can create a supportive environment in your classroom. Lastly, we'll direct you where you can find even more information on trauma in children. On behalf of the members of the Handle with Care Cross-Sector Implementation Team, thanks for your commitment to supporting the children and youth of Washtenaw County.
Hi, my name is Kate Rosenblum, and I'm a clinical and developmental psychologist and professor of psychiatry at Michigan Medicine, where I direct our Zero to Thrive and Infant and Early Childhood program. I'm also a member of the Washtenaw Early Childhood Trauma-Informed Collaborative. Thank you for viewing this presentation. Today I'm going to focus on trauma during the early years, from preschool into early elementary school, and we'll focus on four main topics. First, what is trauma and what are common traumatic events in the lives of young children? 2, what is the impact of trauma on the young developing child? 3, what are common symptoms associated with trauma and what might I see in my classroom? 4, what are the things that I can do to be helpful and supportive when I know I have a child in my classroom who's been exposed to a potentially traumatic event? I want to start by acknowledging that stress and challenge are a normal part of life for all families. We've evolved systems for coping with normal, expectable stresses and challenge, even when these stresses are significant. Building and practicing coping skills can enhance resilience in the face of adversity, and this is something that we can all do to promote all children's well-being. When we talk about trauma, however, we're talking about events that exceed the normal, expectable level of stress and challenge. Traumatic events, by definition, threaten and overwhelm the person's sense of safety and integrity, bodily, psychologically, emotionally, and overwhelm the person's ability to cope. After experiencing a traumatic event, it's normal for people of all ages to have post-traumatic stress reactions. Support for coping at this time is critical in helping promote resilience in the face of such events. So, what might constitute particularly stressful and/or potentially traumatic events in the lives of young children? There are many things that children might experience as stressful or traumatic, and these can range from sudden unexpected changes in home or school, experiences of abuse or neglect, divorce, experiences of discrimination, homelessness, neglect associated with parental substance abuse, witnessing the arrest of a family member, parent incarceration, or natural disasters. Importantly, for young children who trust in and rely on parents and adult caregivers to establish safety in the environment, witnessing the abuse of a family member, as in circumstances of domestic violence, or witnessing community violence, fundamentally violates that sense of trust and safety. We know from an abundance of research that witnessing violence can actually have a more deleterious effect on the long-term outcomes for young children, sometimes even more so than being the direct target of physical abuse or harm. So we're concerned not only for what young children directly experience, but what they witness and how this impacts their sense of safety and trust as well. Unfortunately, while there used to be a sense that young children would be protected from exposure to experiences of trauma, we now know that young children are exposed to traumatic events and stressors at very similar rates to older children. And indeed, in large epidemiological studies, we learned that over half of children have experienced at least one severe stressor by the time they're 5 years old. The most common traumatic stressors for young children include accidents, physical trauma, abuse, neglect, and exposure to domestic violence or community violence. Not only do young children experience traumatic events, they're also impacted by these events. Just as we see with adults who experience trauma, when young children experience traumatic events, it can impact their emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and even their underlying biology. Indeed, until not long ago, even our own mental health diagnostic systems didn't acknowledge or account for the impact of traumatic events on young kids. But more recent research tells us that even infants have responses to traumatic events at these levels, and that toddlers, preschoolers, and young children can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Trauma affects even the very young, who often don't have the words or ability to share with us what they're thinking or feeling, and therefore need us as adults to pay extra attention to their experiences and recognize that their behavior can have meaning. This image is taken from a handout that's available to you to share with families about the impact of trauma and stress on young children, and I'll tell you where to find that in a little while. But for now, what it summarizes is the ways that stress can impact many aspects of children's functioning. Stress associated with traumatic events can reduce children's ability to respond, learn, or figure things out, which clearly has implications for their experiences in the classroom. It can interfere with coping, which can lead to behaviors such as fighting, checking out, or defiance. It increases problems with learning and memory and can interfere with positive social relatedness, impacting friendships and peer interactions. At a physiological level, trauma and stress lead to increased production of stress hormones. While this is important in mobilizing the body to respond to stress, long-term exposure to stress hormones now has a pretty well-documented deleterious effect on health and well-being. For example, increased and prolonged exposure to cortisol affects the body's ability to fight infection. Longitudinal studies tracking the health outcomes of adults who experience traumatic events early in life, as in the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs study, demonstrates that early adversity can lead not only to the more expectable social emotional difficulties, but also to a range of poor health outcomes, including cardiovascular disease, depression, even cancer. The risks associated with these experiences grow as the number of adversities faced increases. It's not magic how these things are linked. Research tells us that there are many potential pathways linking to these outcomes, and these include disrupted neurodevelopmental processes and higher inflammatory markers associated with exposure to stress hormones. It's also important to keep in mind that these events are not things that only happen to other people, but in fact, exposure to childhood adversity as measured in the ACEs study is common. Most people across all sociodemographic and cultural groups have experienced at least one ACE. This is something that affects and concerns us all. If you're interested in these studies, I encourage you to look up the ACEs study on the CDC website, where you can learn much more. So how do these biological and psychological phenomena look in young children? Trauma-related symptoms can vary. The first thing that I encourage people to attend to is changes in children's behavior. You know your students, and when you're alerted that a child has a Handle with Care notification, you may want to pay particular attention to changes in that child's behavior, as it may reflect the child's experiences and needs. Things that we often see in young children who have experienced particularly stressful or traumatic events include, but are not limited to, heightened distractibility, difficulty attending and learning, difficulty with transitions, dysregulated behaviors such as screaming, destroying toys or objects, difficulty calming oneself, developmental regression such as difficulties with potty training or regression in language, difficulty with separations, sleep problems, more silent or withdrawn behavior, and importantly, fearfulness or appearing to check out, startle, or be emotionally dysregulated, including behaviors that might involve hurting others. Importantly, we know that young children can struggle to convey what they are experiencing. Imagine this thought bubble above your student's head. While he may be acting out, hitting, distracted, angry, or fearful, what he might be experiencing inside is, I'm feeling overwhelmed. When I'm overwhelmed, I can't hear you, I can't think clearly or respond well, and what I really need is your help to calm me and keep me safe. Making the transition from thinking, why is he doing this to me, to maybe something's happened to him and what does he need from me, is at the core of trauma-informed work. It can be so hard to do this for so many reasons. Among them, one, it's understandably hard to manage and support children when they're acting out or challenging in some way. And so we have to have our own support and remind ourselves to keep perspective when we're having natural feelings of frustration or challenge. Second, we don't always know if something's happened, and so we might not immediately understand the context of the behaviors. This is part of the wonderful nature of the Handle with Care initiative, in that it helps address this and makes us sensitive and aware of the fact that children have faced something difficult. We don't even have to know what the event was in order to be aware and helpful. Just knowing that this child has something hard that they've faced can really help us make sense differently of their behavior. Of course, keep in mind that this trauma-informed shift is important even when we don't know. We should always be curious if changes in children's behavior and/or difficult or challenging behavior is a reflection of hard feelings and experiences, and think about how we can be helpful in our response. And third, we don't always immediately know what we can do to be helpful. So in this presentation, we want to share some thoughts here today, along with letting you know about resources that can further support your work. Until now, this talk has underscored hard things, like how common traumatic events are in the lives of young children and the ways that these events can have a big impact. And if this was all I was going to share with you, it might feel pretty pessimistic and overwhelming. But the good news is that there's lots of reasons to hope. Even young children who experience stressful, adverse experiences can be resilient, and you can be an important part of helping to build that resilience. So what is resilience? It's the ability to bounce back, to return to being healthy and hopeful even after bad things happen. An abundance of research now tells us that when the important caregivers in children's lives, and this includes teachers, provide a safe environment and help children build resilience, this can reduce the harmful effects of trauma and stress. How can you do this? First, as we discussed before, watch for changes in children's behavior and have a trauma-informed perspective. Inside, you can be wondering, I wonder if something has happened that's contributing to this behavior, and if there's any way that I can be helpful. Being helpful does not mean that you have to be a clinical psychologist or an investigator of what happened. In fact, often what children need from you as their teacher does not involve you becoming their therapist, but instead being a trustworthy, supporting, and nurturing adult who pays attention and creates an environment of support, predictability, and safety, and ready to make referrals and access other supports if it seems necessary or helpful. So how can you create this type of environment for kids? Some things that teachers can do is to be mindful and provide a consistent, predictable pattern for the day. Routines and predictability create safety and normalize experience, and this is often especially important for reassuring children whose experiences recently have been so out of the ordinary, and can help them to feel like not everything has been turned upside down. There is routine and safety at school. Offer choices as appropriate. These opportunities can help children build a sense of control when they've recently felt helpless or out of control. Offer extra nurture and warmth. Use the power of relationship and connection to let the child know that you're there, you notice and care for them. Respond, pay attention, acknowledge and validate their feelings. Offer safe ways to express feelings. Let kids feel okay about expressing feelings, but also know that it's important to maintain expectations about keeping behavior safe. You might, for example, say, it's okay to be angry, but I can't let you hit. Practice relaxation techniques during low stress times with the whole class so that the children can use these strategies without stigma during high stress periods. These might include things like counting to 10, breathing, positive self-talk, and imagery. And importantly, stay calm, present, and patient. Children take their cues from you and feel reassured when the adults around them convey a sense that things are okay and under control. These are just a few simple suggestions, but there are many, many resources out there that offer terrific ideas and materials for you to use in your classroom and with your students. Among them are the trauma information tool that I described earlier that has much of the same information presented today in a user-friendly format for families, teachers, and other adults. Also, Sesame Street has produced some terrific resources addressing early childhood trauma. These and other resources are available to you at the Washtenaw ISD Handle with Care website. Of course, sometimes the things described here today are just not enough, and there's a need for more support and help. In those instances, you may, for example, have a very important role in helping connect the child to care. When you are particularly concerned about a child in your class, utilize your Handle with Care resources. You can reach out to your Handle with Care champions in your school building and district to identify and access additional resources and support for your student. Finally, I want to end this by acknowledging the importance of self-care. Your task is enormous as teachers, and supporting children who have experienced stress and adversity is not only logistically complicated, but emotionally challenging as well. Be sure to pay attention to your own resilience. Find and do things that help you stay calm in times of stress. Reach out for help and support one another. Remember, we're all stewards of our own capacity to be helpful to others. As Maria Theresa invoked, to keep a lamp burning, we have to keep putting oil in it. Thank you for all that you do. Teachers play such a critical role in the lives of children, and we know that this is perhaps even more critically so for children who are experiencing a heightened need for care and support. Thank you for your work, for the impact you make every day, and for your willingness to be a part of how we all support and nurture resilience in our community.
Hi, I'm Melissa Pinsky, Education Manager for Preschool Programs at the Washtenaw Intermediate School District. Thanks for watching this Handle with Care training video. By now, you've learned some of the signs and symptoms of trauma in the children with whom you work, and you have an idea of what you can do in the classroom to support these and all children. If you have additional questions or are looking for local resources, please visit www.washtenawisd.org/handlewithcare. All Handle with Care materials, including these PowerPoint presentations and additional resources about trauma and resiliency, can be found at that website. In addition to this video and the others in the Handle with Care series, you've also been provided the Washtenaw Trauma Information Tool. This tool makes a great reference for you and is also a resource that you can provide to parents. Additionally, please note that the Handle with Care form that you receive in the event of a child's exposure to a traumatic event can also be used as a referral form if you feel that child is in need of additional support. Both of these items can be found on the website www.washtenawisd.org/handlewithcare. As trusted adults in the lives of children, your role in supporting kids who have been exposed to trauma cannot be underestimated. Thanks for joining us on this journey as we work toward becoming a trauma-informed community.